Hey there. You wake up, not to an alarm clock or birds chirping, but to the sound of a donkey braying right outside your window. Because yes, you live above a stable. That's normal here. Welcome to ancient Rome, a city of marble temples, aqueducts, and philosophical debates. Also filth, sewage, and the constant threat of being trampled by a chariot. So take a deep breath. Actually, maybe don't. The air smells like smoke, sweat, and something rotting under your bed. There's no fresh linen, no clean socks, just yesterday's tunic, still damp from last night's rain leak. You stretch, your back screams. Your head pounds. Not because you were out drinking, though you might have been. Just because this is what waking up in ancient Rome feels like. Hard, hot, unforgiving. And now, it's time to start your day. If you survive it, subscribe, but only if it provides you peace, and let me know in the comments. Wherever you're watching from, I'd love to hear from you. Because even after all these centuries, Rome still watches us back. From broken columns, from graffiti carved into stone, from the bones of people who lived, died, and left behind a story we're still trying to understand. So come on, let's walk through the streets together. No sandals, no sunscreen, just curiosity. And maybe a little fear. Because this isn't just history, it's survival school, Roman style. Okay, you open the door, or rather, you nudge it open. It's warped from humidity and misuse. The hallway smells like mildew and stale wine. Someone's yelling downstairs. Probably your landlord. He wants rent. Again, you ignore him. For now, because the real nightmare begins once you step outside. Into the street. Imagine walking into a world where everything is sticky. Not metaphorically. Literally. The ground sticks to your sandals. Your clothes stick to your skin. Even your thoughts feel stuck like they're coated in dust and despair. It's already hot. Of course it is. You're in Rome. The sun doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up. Like an abusive boyfriend. You try to avoid stepping in anything gross. Good luck. The road is a mix of mud, animal dung, discarded fish guts, and whatever some drunk senator threw up after last night's feast. There are no sidewalks. Well, there are sort of. Raised stones you can hop across to keep your feet dry. Except everyone else is doing the same. So instead of graceful hopping, you're playing human Tetris, dodging carts, avoiding spitting merchants, and trying not to get punched by a gladiator who thinks you looked at his girlfriend wrong. Because yes, that's a thing. In Rome, looks can kill. Literally. Now imagine this. You haven't even had breakfast yet, but you're already tired, hungry, sweating, smelling like yesterday's regrets. And somehow, you've made it 5 minutes into your day. Congratulations. Now let's talk about food. Because Roman cuisine isn't exactly gourmet. Breakfast, if you can call it that, consists of two things. Stale bread, watered down wine, sometimes cheese, sometimes olives, mostly disappointment. Forget eggs, forget bacon, forget toast with avocado and a sprinkle of chili flakes. None of that exists. Instead, you chew on something called panis rusticus, which translates roughly to rock you eat. Dense, chewy, tastes like sandpaper soaked in regret. And the wine? Diluted, because even Romans knew that getting hammered before noon was bad news. Unless you were a senator. Then go ahead. Get wasted. People will think you're wise. There's no kitchen in your apartment. Why would there be? You live in an insula, a crumbling, overcrowded tenement building that leans slightly to the left, like it's giving up on life. These buildings are death traps, made of wood, plaster, and hope. They collapse. A lot. Fires? Common. Earthquakes? Sure. Murder? Also surprisingly common. But hey, at least you have a view of the neighbour's laundry swinging like banners of defeat. After breakfaster, what passes for it, you need to do something humans have done since the dawn of time. Take a dump. But in Rome, that's not just a bodily function. It's a social event. Public toilets. Yes. Multiple seats. Side by side. No dividers. Just a row of Romans sitting in silence, sweating, and occasionally grunting. There's a communal sponge on a stick. Don't ask. Worse than the lack of privacy? The smell, and the flies, and the fact that disease spreads faster than gossip in the Senate. You finish. You wash your hands. Wait. No soap. No running water. Just a dip in a basin that's probably seen more fingers than a handshake competition. You leave feeling lighter and slightly dead inside. But hey, at least you didn't fall in. Time to work. What do? Well, unless you're born into wealth, you're either a labourer, a craftsman, a merchant, or a servant. And even then, jobs suck. Blacksmithing burns your skin off. Construction kills your back. Being a scribe gives you carpal tunnel and eye strain from squinting at wax tablets. And if you're poor, you sell vegetables or body parts. As in, you literally line up every morning hoping someone hires you for manual labour. One day, hauling bricks. Next day, cleaning gutters. Then maybe, just maybe, you get lucky and land a gig carrying a wealthy man's chair through the forum. Congrats. You're now a glorified footstool. Lunch? Same bread. More wine. Maybe a fig if you're lucky. Or a chickpea fritter bought from a street vendor who may or may not have washed his hands. Food in Rome wasn't about flavour. It was about fuel, survival, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. Pizza didn't exist. Pasta hadn't been invented. Tomatoes? Not even discovered. So you're looking at porridge made from spelt, lentils, beans, and herbs if you're lucky. Tastes like wet gravel. Feels like eating concrete. Protein? Rare. Meat was expensive. Fish? If it's not rotten. Cheese? Availably if you don't mind it tasting like old socks. And forget coffee. Romans drank wine. All day. Every day. Even for breakfast. Even for dinner. Even for lunch. Especially when things got too real. Politics. Oh yeah. You thought you could escape that? Nope. In Rome, politics followed you everywhere. Like a stray dog that won't stop licking your ankle. You wake up to statues of emperors. You walk past posters praising senators. You overhear conversations about taxes, wars, and public games. Politics was everywhere. And so was corruption. Senators bribed their way into power. Generals fought over control. Emperors came and went like fashion trends. And you're just trying to survive another day without getting drafted into the army. Or worse, sentenced to fight in the arena. Because in Rome, justice was fast and final. If you stole bread, whipping. If you insulted the emperor, death. And if you broke any number of obscure laws, crucifixion. Yep, that was a thing. And not just for criminals. Sometimes just for being inconvenient. Sanitation? Let's not sugarcoat it. Ancient Rome had the worst bathroom etiquette in history. Sure, they had aqueducts, massive engineering marvels bringing water from miles away. But did that water reach the average person? Nope. Unless you were rich enough to afford private plumbing, you shared with thousands. Fountains were crowded. Baths were full of naked strangers, scrubbing each other down with oil and a scraper. Soap didn't exist. Toilets were public. Hygiene? A gamble. You could catch plague from a handshake, dysentery from a shared sponge. And if you weren't careful, you might end up buried in a mass grave somewhere near the Tiber River. Because Rome was beautiful, but also deadly. Class structure? Oh boy. This was a society built on hierarchy. At the top, senators, patricians, emperors. They lived in sprawling villas with mosaics, frescoes, and private baths. They ate flamingo tongues for fun. You're lucky if you own a blanket. Below them were the equestrian wealthy business owners and generals. Then came the plebeians, the working class. Farmers, bakers, soldiers, then freedmen, former slaves, still struggling, then slaves, who had no rights. And finally, you guessed it, the guy who accidentally insulted a statue of Augustus once. That's you, poor, tired, and probably hungry again, because hunger never leaves. It just gets quieter. By now, you've survived the heat, the noise, the smell, and the occasional chariot nearly killing you. You pass by a temple. Priests chant. Statues of gods loom overhead. Jupiter, Mars, Juno. You bow. You mutter a prayer. You toss a coin into a fountain. Not because you believe in miracles, but because you believe in consequences. In Rome, religion wasn't optional. It was survival. Cross the gods, and suddenly your roof collapses. Your cow dies. Your kid gets sick. Everyone nods knowingly. You must have offended the gods. So better safe than sorry. Light a candle. Burn some incense. Pray to Janus before crossing the street. God of beginnings. Also apparently god of not getting run over by a cart. Thanks, Janus. Night falls. Finally, you return to your apartment. If you're lucky, the stairs aren't collapsed. If you're not, you climb in darkness, dodging rats the size of small dogs. Inside, your room is dark, airless, hot. You lie down on a straw mat, maybe a wooden plank. Dreams are rare. Sleep is survival. And even in sleep, you're not safe. Because Rome doesn't sleep. It roars. Music, brawls, arguments, street performers, prostitutes, pickpockets, and the ever-present risk of fire. One spark, one overturned lamp, and the whole building goes up like a pile of dry hay in a thunderstorm. Would you survive a day here? Honestly, no, you wouldn't. Modern humans, with our toothpaste, antibiotics, plumbing, and climate-controlled homes, we wouldn't last 6 hours, let alone a full day. And yet, the Romans endured. They built roads that still hold up today. They mapped the stars. They wrote poetry while bleeding from wounds. They debated philosophy in smoky taverns. They loved. They laughed. They danced. They mourned. They built a civilization that shaped the world, even if most of them lived in misery, even if most of them died young, even if most of them never saw the inside of a palace. Rome wasn't built by emperors. It was built by nameless millions who woke up every day and faced a world that gave them nothing and expected everything. Would you trade your modern life for this? I wouldn't. I'd be begging to go back to my hot shower and cold beer within an hour. But I'm fascinated by how they lived, by how they suffered, by how they still managed to build something that outlived them. And I want to know, did you make it through this day? Did you survive the heat, the smell, the politics, the toilet? Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what time it is. Tell me what part of this day scared you the most. Was it the food? The lack of medicine? The class divide? The public pooping? Whatever it was, you're not alone. Because even the Romans sometimes just wanted to go home and cry. Nightlife, entertainment in ancient Rome. You thought the day was brutal? Wait until the sun goes down, because in ancient Rome, the night doesn't bring peace. It brings chaos, noise, fire, and more chances to die. You've survived the heat, the smell, the politics, the sand in your bread. Now, as the sky darkens and the city cools just slightly, you might think, finally, some rest. But no, not in Rome. At night, the city doesn't sleep. It prowls. It drinks. It fights. It dances. It burns. Let's start with something simple. Lighting. There is none. Unless you're rich enough to afford oil lamps, then sure, you get a flicker of flame inside your villa. For everyone else, darkness. Thick. Complete. The kind that swallows you whole if you step off the curb. No streetlights. No lanterns lining the alleys. Just moonlight. And stars. And the occasional torch from a drunken procession stumbling through the forum. So, how do you find your way home? You don't. You guess. You follow the sound of voices, or the stench of the gutter, or the unmistakable rhythm of someone beating a drum for a late-night festival that probably started because someone forgot what day it was. And then there's the noise. Oh man, the noise. Rome never shuts up, even at night. Music blares from taverns. Men shout over wine. Prostitutes call out their rates. Drunks sing songs that make no sense but feel deeply emotional in the moment. And somewhere nearby, a philosopher is yelling about fate, while a gladiator argues with a charioteer about who would win in a fight between a lion and a crocodile. Spoiler, both lose, because Rome eats everyone eventually. If you're lucky or unlucky, you end up in a tavern. A taberna, they call it. It's not charming. It's not cozy. It's loud, crowded, smells like sweat, smoke, and cheap wine. The floor is sticky. The air is thicker than Roman bureaucracy. And the food? More like a dare than a meal. Salted fish, garlic bread, cheese that may or may not be alive, and wine. Always wine. Watered down. Sometimes mixed with honey. Sometimes mixed with lead. Either way, it gets the job done. Entertainment? Well, forget Netflix. In Rome, you have blood sport, theatre, and spontaneous brawls. And sometimes all three at once. The big event, the Colosseum Games, are usually daytime affairs. But when the sun sets, That doesn't mean the fun stops. It just changes form. Instead of watching men fight lions, you watch drunk nobles argue over philosophy. Or worse, treat a dance. Roman dancing was basically flailing while wearing a toga. Like interpretive movement meets mild intoxication. No choreography, just emotion. Lots of it. And lots of people clapping politely. Because in Rome, even bad dancing deserves applause, if only to avoid offending the gods. Then there are the festivals. Planned, chaotic, unavoidable. Some nights, entire streets shut down for religious processions. Priests chant, drums beat, statues of gods are paraded around like VIP guests. People throw flowers, others throw dice. Everyone drinks. And if you're not careful, you end up part of the parade, dragged into the street by strangers who think you look like you need to worship Bacchus tonight. Which you don't. But now you are. And what about the nightlife? Ah, yes. Rome had clubs. Sort of. They had luminaria brothels lit with oil lamps and decorated with erotic frescoes. They had gambling dens where men bet everything they own on dice rolls. They had music halls where lyres and pipes played, while poets recited verses that made absolutely no sense. And they had open-air performance actors dressed in masks, telling stories of tragedy, comedy, and divine wrath. All under the stars. All free. Because entertainment was a tool, a distraction, a way to keep the people happy while senators plotted behind closed doors. But not all nighttime activities were fun. Some were terrifying, like fire. Real, actual fire. Remember those insulae, those wooden apartment buildings that lean like they're tired of standing? Yeah, one spark, one overturned lamp, and suddenly you're not watching a show. You're running from one. Smoke fills the streets. Flames lick the sky. Children scream. Someone yells, "Jupiter, help us!" He won't. And the vigiless the night watchmen are, either asleep or too busy trying to save the emperor's bathhouse to care about your tenement. Welcome to Rome after dark, where safety is optional. Survival is not. And then there's the crime. Oh yes. At night, the real Rome comes out. Pickpockets, cut purses, muggers, occasionally an ex-gladiator looking for trouble. Walking alone after sunset is basically a death wish, unless you carry a knife, or walk with friends, or bribe someone to walk with you. Protection wasn't illegal, it was expected. And if you couldn't afford a bodyguard, you prayed to Mercury, god of travellers, and luck, because you needed both. And let's talk about sex. Because, yeah, ancient Rome didn't shy away from it. Brothels were everywhere, legal, regulated, taxed, and full. Whether you were rich or poor, married or single, curious or desperate, the lupanar was always open. Candles flickered, bodies moved, names were forgotten, and the next morning, no shame, only exhaustion. Would you last a night here? Honestly, probably not. Your modern ears wouldn't handle the noise. Your stomach wouldn't handle the wine. And your heart definitely wouldn't handle the sudden appearance of a man in a wolf costume screaming about Jupiter's wrath. But still, there was magic in it. In the chaos, in the noise, in the rhythm of a city that never truly slept. Because Rome wasn't just built on marble and law, it was powered by spectacle. by energy, by the thrill of survival. And whether you were born rich or poor, slave or citizen, every night was a gamble, a performance, a party, a danger, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of joy. Religion, ritual after dark. You thought the sun going down meant the gods went to sleep? Nope. In ancient Rome, the night is when they come alive. Not in temples, not in statues, but in shadows, in firelight, in whispered prayers and secret rites. Because not all rituals are for the daylight crowd. Some are only meant for the dark. So you've survived the day, the heat, the politics, the questionable food. Now the sky turns deep purple, then black, and with it comes something heavier than fatigue, something sacred, or maybe just terrifying. Because in Rome, nighttime isn't just for rest, it's for worship. Of gods who like their offerings after hours. Of spirits that don't want your face. They want your soul. Let's talk about the lemures. Ever heard of them? Probably not. Because they're not the friendly kind of spirits. They're the restless dead. The ones who died without burial. The ones who were forgotten. And they don't like that. So every May, Romans perform the Lemuria, a festival meant to appease these vengeful ghosts. At midnight, alone, you stand barefoot at your front door. You wash your hands not for cleanliness, for ritual. Then you throw black beans over your shoulder, while muttering 9 times, "With these I redeem myself and mine." Why beans? Who knows? But the lemures love them. And if you do it right, they take the beans instead of your life. Creepy? Yes. Effective? Maybe. Because no one wants to find out what happens if you skip it. And then there's the Mithraic cult. Oh yes. This one's intense. Imagine walking into a cave. Dark. Smelly. Lit by flickering oil lamps. Blood stains the stone floor. This isn't a temple. It's a Mithraeum, a secret underground shrine dedicated to Mithrasti, god of soldiers, contracts, and cosmic order. Only men allowed. Only initiates. And initiation is brutal. You crawl through symbolic death, are baptized in blood, and eat bread and wine like it's part of a sacred meal. Because it is. To these worshippers, Mithras is more than a god. He's a warrior, a saviour, a divine force. And his rituals? Performed at night, in silence, with swords drawn, because faith here isn't peaceful. It's earned, through pain, through secrecy, through loyalty. There's also the cult of Cybele and Attis. Wild, chaotic, freaky. Cybele is the mother goddess. Attis is her lover. His story, a myth of passion, betrayal, madness, and rebirth. And during the spring festival, known as Hilaria, things get weird. Priests dance themselves into trances. Drums beat like war drums. Flutes scream like wind through trees. They cut themselves, bleeding for the gods, dying for the divine. And again this happens at night, when the veil between worlds is thin, when the gods listen harder, when the air feels heavy with unseen eyes. And then there's the Isis cult. More open, more inclusive. Women can join. Slaves too. Isis was the goddess of magic, motherhood, and mystery. And her followers believed she watched, even when no one else did. Her rituals often took place at night, because Isis was a moon goddess. She thrived in darkness. Temples glowed with torches. Incense curled into the air. Chants echoed off marble walls. And initiates went through stages of purification, fasting, and dream interpretation. Some even slept inside the temple overnight, believing Isis would visit them in dreams. Give them guidance. Heal their wounds. Speak to their hearts. And let's not forget the Dionysian rites, also known as the original rave. Worshippers of Dionysus, Bacchus to the Romans, gathered under moonlight. Men and women danced until they couldn't feel their legs. They drank until the world blurred. They screamed until their throats hurt. And sometimes, things got out of hand. The Roman Senate once tried to ban these gatherings. Too wild, too dangerous, too seductive. They called them bacchanalia and feared they'd turn citizens into rebels. Because in the dark, when the wine flows and the music rises, people forget their place, forget the emperor, forget the law, and remember only the rhythm. The release, the divine madness. Rome had laws against secret religions. Officially, but unofficially, the city pulsed with them. Because in the dark, away from prying eyes and judgmental senators, people found meaning in the hidden, in the forbidden, in the strange. These weren't just rituals. They were rebellion, faith outside control, spirituality beyond empire. And for many Romans, that was the only kind worth having. The warrior queen who defied an empire. A story of vengeance, honor, and unbreakable will. You don't hear her name in every history class, but she did something no one else could. She defeated Cyrus the Great, 2, the founder of the Persian Empire, the man who conquered Babylon, the king who believed he was unstoppable. And she? A woman from the steppe, a queen without marble palaces or golden thrones, but with fire in her blood and vengeance in her heart. Let's go back to the edge of civilization, where cities ended and the wild wind ruled, to the land of the Massagutai, a nomadic people who lived by horse, bow, and blade. They didn't build walls. They didn't write laws on stone tablets. They carved their names into memory, through battle, through survival, through legend. And among them stood a woman, Tamias, or Tamiris, as the Greeks would later call her. A leader not born of royal luxury, but of necessity, of grit, of loss. At first, Cyrus ignored her. Why wouldn't he? He had already crushed Lydia, taken Babylon, expanded his empire further than any ruler before him. The world bent to his will, except this one woman, from a land that didn't even have cities. She refused him, not just once, but twice. First, when he proposed marriage. Then, when he tried to invade. Because that's what kings do. They take, even when they say they're offering. And she saw through the lie, saw the greed behind the diplomacy. So she said no. And for that, her son died, captured, killed, in the chaos of war. Can you imagine that moment? When the news reached her that her child, her own flesh, was gone, slain, by the man who thought he could walk into her land and leave with it wrapped in silk and gold. What did she feel? Grief? Yes. Rage? Absolutely. But also clarity. Because now, it wasn't just about defending her people. It was personal. Now, it was about blood. And she would make Cyrus drown in it. She sent him a message. Simple, fierce, unforgettable. I live to teach you this lesson. Never underestimate a mother whose child has been taken. And then she led her warriors, not into a trap, but into history. The Massagetæ weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They were riders, archers, survivors. They fought not for glory, but for freedom. And when Cyrus crossed the river Araxes, thinking he'd face a scattered tribe, he walked into hell. Tamias lured him deeper. Let his men feast, drink, fall into drunken stupor. Then struck, hard, fast, merciless, and in the blood-soaked grasslands of the steppe, the great king of Persia fell. Whether he died in battle or was captured and executed, no one knows. But this much is clear. He didn't walk away, and neither did his army. Afterward, Tamias found his body. Some say she cut off his head. Some say she buried it with honor. But the most haunting tale, she took his head, placed it in a wineskin, filled it with blood, and whispered, "Drink your fill of the blood you thirsted for." A final act, not of cruelty, but of justice. A mother's revenge, carved into history. And yet, history tried to forget her, because empires remember their victories, not their defeats, especially not at the hands of a woman. The Persians erased her from their records. The Romans barely mentioned her, but the wind remembered, the horses remembered, the steppe remembered, and so did the storytellers. For centuries, her name survived in whispers, passed down through oral traditions, etched into poetry, painted onto scrolls, reborn in statues. She became more than a queen. She became a symbol of resistance, of strength, of what happens when you cross a woman who fights not for power, but for love, for family, for home. She didn't need marble. She didn't need gold. She needed justice. And she got it. With arrows, with horses, with fire. She made Cyrus the Great, just another fallen king, buried in the dust, while she rode on, forever. The legacy of Tamias across cultures. A slow-reading, emotionally varied, human-toned narration. You may not find her name in every history book, but you'll find her everywhere else. In whispered legends, in the wind over the steppe, in the eyes of mothers who refuse to let their children be forgotten. Tamias, whether spelled Tomarus, Tomarus, or another variation, was more than a warrior queen. She was a symbol of defiance, of vengeance, of what happens when power meets fury. And across cultures, across centuries, her story has been told and retold, not just as history, but as myth. The Greek gaze, Herodotus, and the fall of an empire. Let's start with the first known account of her. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, often called the father of history, wrote about her nearly a century after she lived. He didn't write from first-hand experience. He wrote from stories passed down, from travellers, from traders, from soldiers who still remembered the echo of hooves on dry land. To him, she was a warning, a lesson in humility. Cyrus, the great founder of the Persian Empire, had conquered Babylon, Lydia, and countless other lands. But he underestimated one woman, a nomadic queen from the steppes. No marble palaces, no golden thrones, just horses, bows, and rage. Herodotus painted her as both noble and terrifying. A mother who lost her son, a leader who refused to kneel, and a warrior who made sure Cyrus paid for his arrogance with blood. He even recorded the most haunting image of all. After the battle, she found his body, severed his head, placed it inside a wineskin filled with blood, and whispered, "Drink your fill of the blood you thirsted for." Whether this act was literal or symbolic, we may never know, but the message was clear. She didn't just defeat an empire, she humiliated it. The Persian silence, erased but not forgotten. Now imagine being the Persians. You've built one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. Your armies stretch from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley. You pride yourselves on diplomacy, tolerance, and military might. And then, a footnote. A woman from the steppe. Who killed your founder? How do you respond? You don't. Not openly. Because if you erase her from your records, maybe the world will forget, too. But they didn't. And neither did you. Because even without monuments or royal decrees, her name lingered like a shadow over your empire. Cyrus's tomb still stands today in Pasargadae, peaceful and untouched. But walk through its halls, quietly enough, and you can almost hear whispers of the woman who ended him. The Renaissance revival, painted in blood and glory. Fast forward over 20 years. Europe is in the middle of the Renaissance. Artists rediscover classical texts. Painters bring old myths back to life. And somewhere between canvas and imagination, Tamias rides again. This time, not on horseback, but on brushstrokes. Paintings depict her standing over Cyrus's body. Blood-soaked armour, fire in her eyes. Sometimes, she holds his severed head high. Other times, she looks away haunted by what she had to do. These artists weren't historians. They were storytellers, using her image not just to tell history, but to ask questions. What does it mean for a woman to kill a king? Is she justice or vengeance? Is she monster or martyr? To them, she was both. A paradox, a challenge, a woman who refused to play by the rules of empire, and that made her unforgettable. Central Asia, the ghost of the steppe. But where Tamias truly lives is not in Greek scrolls or European paintings. It's in the steppe winds, in the oral traditions of Central Asia, where her name wasn't written. It was sung, passed down by firelight, by mothers teaching daughters that strength doesn't come from crowns. It comes from survival among the Kazakhs, Uzbeks, and Turkmen. She became legend, a queen who rode with the wind at her back and fire in her heart. Not just a ruler, but a protector, a mother, a storm-given form. In some versions, she didn't die after the battle. She simply vanished, rode into the horizon, still watching, still waiting, ready to return when her people need her most. Even now, in parts of Kazakhstan, children grow up hearing stories of a woman who once stood against the world and won. The symbol that crosses time. Tamias is not just a historical figure. She's a mirror, reflected differently in every age. To the Persians, she was a wound. To the Greeks, a cautionary tale. To the Renaissance, a muse. To the Central Asians, a memory. And to the modern world, she's something even more powerful. A question. What happens when we remember women not as queens, but as warriors, as leaders, as forces of nature? History tried to bury her, but she keeps rising. In speeches, in books, in films, in statues, in the quiet strength of girls who are told they can't lead, and choose to anyway. Tamias today, a voice for the unbroken. Today, in Kazakhstan, her name appears in textbooks. Statues rise in her honor. She is not just a relic of the past. She is a symbol of national identity. Proof that leadership doesn't always come from cities. Sometimes it comes from the open plains, from dust, from grit, from grief turned into fire. In feminist movements around the world, she's celebrated not just for defeating a king, but for refusing to be erased, for showing that power isn't always about crowns. Sometimes it's about courage, about choosing to fight when everyone expects you to surrender, about loving so fiercely that your pain becomes your weapon. She was never just one thing. Tamias was not just a mother, not just a queen, not just a soldier. She was all of them, at once, and that's why she endures. Because her story isn't just about war, it's about what drives us to fight. Loss, love, dignity, freedom, and sometimes just plain rage. That moment when someone takes everything from you, and you decide you're not going quietly. You're not letting them win. You're not forgetting. You're not forgiving. You're going to make them pay. And you're going to ride straight into history to do it. Comparing Tamias to other warrior queens, a slow-reading, emotionally varied, human-toned narration. History remembers kings. It carves their names into stone, builds statues taller than mountains. But what about the women? The ones who rode into battle, who led armies not from thrones, but from horseback, who fought not for crowns, but for home, for honor, for vengeance. Let's talk about them. Let's compare Tamias, the steppe queen who killed Cyrus the Great, to other warrior queens who defied empires, Boudica, Cleopatra, and Artemisia. Each one different. Each one unforgettable. Tamias, the mother who rode against an empire. You already know her story. Born of the wind, raised on horseback. She didn't inherit power. She seized it. When Cyrus the Great tried to take her land, he took something worse, her son. So she answered him not with diplomacy, but with arrows, with fire, with fury. And when he fell on the battlefield, she made sure his death was remembered, not quietly, but with a severed head submerged in blood. Was it revenge? Yes. Was it justice? Depends who you ask. But no one can deny this. She stood up to the most powerful man of her time, and she won, not once, but decisively, then vanished, leaving behind only legend. Boudica, the flame that burned Rome. Now picture another woman, this time in ancient Britain, red hair wild, face painted, voice rising above the roar of war. Boudica, queen of the Iceni. Unlike Tamias, Boudica didn't come from a nomadic warrior culture. She came from a people newly conquered by Rome. Her husband died, left part of his kingdom to his daughters. Rome ignored it, took the land, flogged her, raped her daughters. That's when Boudica rose, not just as a queen, as a force. She gathered tribes, burned cities, killed thousands. Colchester, London, St. Albans. Fire followed her like a shadow, and still, she lost. In the end, the Roman legions crushed her rebellion, but not her legacy, because even though she failed, she terrified the empire. So much so that Queen Victoria I, 800 years later, was named after her. A symbol of resistance, of rage, of a mother betrayed. Cleopatra, the mind behind the myth. Now let's go to Egypt. To Cleopatra, not just a queen, a strategist, a diplomat, a woman who played the game better than most men. She didn't ride into battle. She ruled through wit, alliances, and seduction. But make no mistake, she fought. Just differently. She faced two empires, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony. Both used her, both loved her, both fell, and through it all, she tried to protect her country. From Rome, from conquest, from erasure. She lost, but not before becoming the most famous queen in history. Where Tamias left behind mystery, Cleopatra left behind myth. Paintings, movies, poems, legends whispered in every museum. But beneath the eyeliner and gold, there was a woman who wanted to save her people, even if it cost her everything. Artemisia, the admiral who outwitted men. Now imagine a woman standing on the deck of a warship, surrounded by men, men who expect her to obey. Instead, she commands. Artemisia of Halicarnassus, Greek queen, Persian ally, one of the few women in history to lead fleets in naval warfare. She wasn't fighting for freedom like Tamias or Boudica. She fought for survival. She allied with Xerxes during the Persian Wars. And at the Battle of Salamis, she outmaneuvered Greek ships, even fooled both sides. Xerxes watched from the cliffs. He saw her escape, said, "My men have become women, and my women men." She was clever, cunning, unafraid to do what needed to be done, even if it meant betraying allies to save herself. Unlike the others, she lived to tell her own tale. No tragic death, no final stand, just sharp mind, sharp instincts, and a place in history carved not with swords, but with strategy. What made them different? Tamias, Boudica, Cleopatra, Artemisia. 4 women, 4 battles. One question: what made them different? Tamias fought for vengeance, Boudica for justice, Cleopatra for sovereignty, Artemisia for survival. They weren't the same, but they were alike in one way. They refused to be ruled without being heard. They broke the mold. They stepped outside the lines drawn for them, and they did it in a world that said women shouldn't lead, shouldn't fight, shouldn't speak. But speak they did, in fire, in flood, in silence, in blood. Why we remember them? We remember them because they weren't perfect. They were real. Tamias didn't leave letters, only legends. Boudica didn't win, but she burned brighter than most kings. Cleopatra didn't die in battle, but she fought harder than many generals. Artemisia didn't seek glory. She sought survival. And still, she earned respect from the very men who thought women couldn't lead. These women weren't born into battle. They were forged by it, by loss, by betrayal, by necessity. They didn't ask for war, but when it came, they met it head on. Their voices still echo. Today, we say, behind every great man, there's a great woman. But these women weren't behind anyone. They were out front, leading, fighting, dying, winning, losing, but never fading. Because some stories aren't told in marble. They're told in memory, in song, in firelight, and in the quiet strength of girls who hear their names and think, if they could do it, so can I. The sweet science of the ancients. A story of bees, honey, and divine order. You wake up, not to an alarm clock, but to the hum of bees. In ancient Egypt, or Mesopotamia, or Greece, or Rome, thousands of years ago, before supermarkets, before refrigeration, before even sugar, there was honey, liquid gold, a gift from the gods. And the people who kept the bees? They were more than farmers. They were scientists, priests, engineers, keepers of a sacred craft. Huge ancient Egypt, the hive as temple. Let's start where many great stories begin. Egypt, land of pyramids, gods, and bees. Yes, bees. Because in ancient Egypt, beekeeping wasn't just about harvesting honey. It was part of the cosmic order. Honey was used in temple offerings, buried with the dead, mixed into medicine, even shaped political identity. Pharaohs of Lower Egypt wore the title, he of the sedge and the bee, symbolizing unity, fertility, divine balance. Their hives, clay tubes, stacked like drain pipes, horizontal, portable, designed to be moved with the seasons. As the Nile flooded and receded, beekeepers followed the flowers like nomads with wings. They blew smoke into the hives, calmed the bees, harvested combs gently, without destroying the colony, because killing your bees meant losing your future. That was smart. That was sustainable. That was science before science had a name. And oh, did they love their honey. Used in embalming, in rituals, in food, even in diplomacy. Royal gifts of honey travelled across deserts, offered not just as food, but as blessing. Mesopotamia, where laws protected the hive. Now imagine yourself in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where writing began, cities rose, and laws protected bees. Yes, laws. The code of Hammurabis, that one had rules about bees. If your bees swarmed into someone else's field and caused damage, you paid for it. If someone stole your honey, restitution was required. Sometimes in silver, sometimes in jars. Honey here wasn't just sweet. It was valuable. So valuable it was traded like grain or oil. Used in offerings, in medicine, in food, even in magic. Some texts described bees as divine messengers, sent by Ninatath, god of agriculture and war. Beeswax sealed documents, created ritual figurines, was both practical and mystical. And while Egyptian hives were stacked clay tubes, Mesopotamians may have used mud brick or woven baskets, protected from heat, hidden in shaded gardens, rooftop sanctuaries, where bees danced in the sun, and humans watched carefully, respectfully, because in a world ruled by gods and kings, even a tiny insect could change your fate. Greece, where bees were philosophical icons. Now picture Greece, philosophy, olive trees, and bees. To the Greeks, bees weren't just insects. They were metaphors, symbols of harmony, of order, of divine purpose. Aristotle studied them, described roles inside the hive. Gatherers, defenders. One he called the king bee, though we now know it was a queen. Still, impressive. Greek beekeepers advanced the craft, used terracotta hives with removable lids, allowed multiple harvests per season. They smoked the bees out not with fear, but with precision, using ceramic bellows, and herbs like thyme, which might have flavoured the honey too. Honey was everywhere, in wine, in cakes, in medicine. Roman doctors prescribed it for wounds. Athletes ate it for energy. Soldiers carried it on campaigns. Because back then, honey wasn't just food. It was fuel and power. But, perhaps most importantly, it was myth. Artemis was tied to bees. Her priestesses were called Melissae, meaning bees. The Oracle of Delphi, once believed to be guided by bee priestesses. The hive was more than a box. It was a mirror of nature, of society, of the gods, and Aristotle, watching the hive with wonder, saw something deeper. Order without chaos, work without waste, life built around purpose. And maybe that's why bees mattered so much. Because in a world full of war and politics, the hive offered peace, structure, meaning. Rome, empire built on honey. Now fast forward to Rome, an empire stretching from Britain to the Middle East. And in every province, bees, beekeepers, hives. The Romans inherited Greek knowledge, but expanded it, formalized it, scaled it. Larger states had dedicated honey farms, run by enslaved labour, managed like businesses. Ledgers recorded production. Markets sold honey by the jar. Exports flowed across the empire, from Gaul to Hispania. Honey was money, food, medicine, fuel for soldiers, wine sweetener, preservative. It was everything, and the Romans knew it. They wrote treatises, Varro, Columella, detailed instructions on hive building, swarm control, seasonal movement. They used hollow logs, cork bark, clay tubes, woven baskets sealed with dung or mud. Smoke came from burning thyme, or oregano, calming bees, maybe adding flavour. Wax became candles, writing tablets, cosmetics, even waterproofing for ships. Yes, bees helped float the Roman navy. But beyond utility, there was belief. Early Christians later adopted the bee as a symbol of chastity, of resurrection, of purity. But the Romans already knew this. To them, bees were industrious, disciplined, productive, like good citizens, like strong armies, like well-run households. A hive was a microcosm of order, of empire, of life itself. Across civilizations, a shared love for the hive. So, what do these civilizations have in common? They all saw bees differently, but they all saw them deeply. In Egypt, bees were born from the tears of Ra, sacred, royal, spiritual. In Mesopotamia, bees were economic assets, regulated, protected, valued. In Greece, bees were philosophers, teachers, myth makers. In Rome, bees were empire builders, workers, strategists, essential. Each culture had its own way of keeping bees, but each understood one truth. The hive was not just a place. It was a system of survival, of trade, of faith, of healing, religious, spiritual symbolism. Bees didn't just make honey. they made meaning. In temples, in tombs, in myths, in rituals. Egyptians believed honey could carry prayers to the afterlife. Greeks linked bees to goddesses. Romans used wax in ceremonies. Mesopotamians released bees during purification ritesto, carry away sins. The idea was consistent. Bees bridged worlds, nature and spirit, life and death, human and divine. Even early Christians adopted the bee as a symbol of resurrection, because bees create life-giving sweetness without lust or violence. Chaste, pure, faithful, and somehow magical. Science, before science existed. We often think of ancient peoples as primitive, but look closer. Look at how they built hives, how they tracked swarms, how they harvested without destroying colonies. They understood pollination, seasonal migration, sustainable farming, long before we had words for it. They observed, they experimented, they improved, all without gloves, without microscopes, without modern tools, just smoke, knives, and patience. They studied bees, treated them with care, understood their rhythms, and passed down their knowledge, generation to generation, skill to skill, until the art of beekeeping became a quiet revolution, one that changed the world. Economic engine of the ancient world. Honey wasn't just sweet, it was currency. In Egypt, it was part of tribute payments. In Rome, it was taxed, traded, exported, stored, sold. It was used to preserve fruit, to sweeten wine, to heal wounds, to seal scrolls, to light lamps, to paint faces in funerals, to feed gods in temples. It touched nearly every aspect of daily life. And those who kept bees, they held power. Not swords, not chariots, but influence. Because whoever controlled honey controlled survival. Legacy that still stings. Today, beekeeping has evolved. Modern suits, movable frames, scientific understanding, but the roots are still there, in ancient clay hives, in smoke-filled rituals, in sacred offerings, in the honeycomb, patterns carved into stone, in the whispers of priestesses named for bees, in the laws protecting apiaries, and in the simple act of opening a hive, knowing you're continuing a tradition older than empires, older than cities, older than written language. How ancient beekeeping influenced modern apiculture. You open a hive today, and you're following a tradition older than writing itself. Because beekeeping, it didn't start with wooden boxes and gloves. It started with smoke, with clay, with reverence, with ancient hands reaching into the dark belly of a hollow log or a stacked clay tube, looking for something sweet, something sacred, something survival depended on. Honey and beeswax, and the miracle of pollination. Long before we understood DNA, before antibiotics, even before we built cities, we had bees, and we had people who knew how to keep them, not just as farmers, but as scientists, engineers, priests, medics, keepers of nature's most mysterious creatures. The first hives, Egypt's terracotta revolution. Let's go back to ancient Egypt, where beekeeping was more than farming. It was ritual. Egyptians built horizontal clay hives, like terracotta drainpipes stacked side by side. Portable, designed to be moved with the seasons. As the Nile flooded and receded, beekeepers followed the flowers like nomads, chasing nectar. They used clay pipes to blow smoke into hives, calm the bees, harvest without destruction. These weren't just techniques. They were systems. Agricultural planning, logistics, sustainability, and yes, science. The Egyptians believed honey could carry prayers to the gods. Offerings were made in temples. Pharaohs stored it in tombs. Doctors mixed it with herbs to heal wounds. And guess what? They were right. Modern science confirms honey's antibacterial power, but they didn't have microscopes. Just experience, observation, faith, laws written in wax. Mesopotamia's practical approach. Now imagine yourself in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where writing began, where laws were carved into stone, including ones about bees. Yes, there were laws about bees. The Code of Hammurabi, over 700 years old, mentions bee disputes. If your bees swarmed onto someone else's land, you paid for the damage. If someone stole your honey, restitution was required, sometimes in silver, sometimes in jars, because honey wasn't just food, it was currency, valuable, protected, respected. While Egyptian hives were sacred, Mesopotamian beekeeping was structured, controlled, managed like any other economic asset. Temples and royal estates maintained apiaries, bee gardens, used honey in offerings, medicine, trade. Beeswax sealed documents, made figurines, even waterproofed boats. In a world ruled by kings and scribes, bees were part of the economy and the law. Greek philosophy, the hive mind. Fast forward to ancient Greece, where beekeeping became more than practice. It became metaphor. Philosophy. Aristotle studied bees, described their roles. Some gathered nectar, others defended the hive. One he called the king, though we now know it was a queen. Still, impressive. Greeks developed movable terracotta hives with removable lids, allowed harvesting without killing colonies. Smoke tools evolved, clay bellows, careful puffs, controlled calm. They even used honey in wine, in cakes, in medicine. They believed bees carried messages from the divine. Their priestesses were called Melissae, meaning bees, and the Oracle of Delphi, once thought to be guided by bee priestesses. To the Greeks, bees weren't just insects. They were symbols of harmony, of order, of purpose, and their observations laid the groundwork for centuries of scientific study. 2. Roman Empire, scaling the hive. Then came the Romans, and where the Greeks saw philosophy, the Romans saw opportunity. Beekeeping exploded across the empire, from Gaul to Hispania, from Syria to Britain. Large estates had dedicated honey farms, run by enslaved labour. Production was recorded in ledgers. Markets sold honey by the jar. Exports flowed across provinces. Roman hives varied. Hollow logs, cork bark containers, clay tubes, woven baskets sealed with dung or mud. Flexibility was key. Different climates needed different designs. Cold regions, more insulation. Hot regions, better ventilation. And when it came time to harvest, smoke again. Thyme, oregano, calming the colony, preserving the hive. Iron knives cut combs. Wax was melted and filtered. Used in candles, writing tablets, cosmetics. even waterproofing ships. Honey was everywhere, added to wine, used in sauces, given to soldiers, prescribed by doctors. Roman physicians followed Hippocratic traditions, used honey for sore throats, for wounds, for digestive problems. Its healing power? Well known, even if the science wasn't. Science before science existed. We often think of ancient peoples as primitive, but look closer. Look at how they built hives, tracked swarms, moved colonies seasonally. They understood pollination, seasonal migration, sustainable harvesting, all without gloves, without microscopes, without modern tools, just smoke, knives, and patience. They observed, they experimented, they improved, all while treating bees not just as pests but as partners. Ancient beekeepers were more than farmers. They were innovators, engineers, scientists, long before we had words for it, tools that still work today. Many of the tools we use today have ancient roots. Smoking bees to calm them? That's from Egypt and Greece. Movable hives? Developed by the Greeks and expanded by the Romans. Relocating hives seasonally to follow bloom cycles? Known as transhumance. Practiced in Egypt. Used today in commercial beekeeping. Even wax extraction? The same method, melt, strain, use, used in cosmetics, in medicine, in preservation. So many modern practices are echoes of ancient wisdom, passed down, refined, used every day by beekeepers around the world. Medicine, food, and faith. Honey wasn't just sweet, it was survival, used to preserve fruit, treat wounds, flavor bread, ferment meat, even embalm bodies. Egyptians packed honey in tombs, believed it would feed the dead in the afterlife. Greek and Roman doctors prescribed it for fevers, for inflammation, for cuts. And guess what? They were right. Honey has antibacterial properties. Medical-grade honey is still used today. Used in burn centers, in hospitals, in battlefield medicine, all because ancient civilizations figured out that honey heals. Long before we had penicillin. Religious, spiritual symbolism. Bees weren't just workers. They were worshipped. Egyptians believed honey was a gift from Ra himself. Greeks linked bees to goddesses. Romans saw them as models of order. Early Christians later adopted the bee as a symbol of purity, of resurrection, of industry, and the idea stuck. Across cultures, across time, even today, bees appear in art, in literature, in myth, in dreams. Because bees don't just make honey, they make meaning. They bridge worlds, nature and spirit, life and death, human and divine, sustainable practices, born from necessity. Today, we talk about sustainability like it's new, but beekeepers in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome already knew. Killing your bees meant losing your future. So they harvested carefully, respectfully, repeatedly. They didn't destroy hives. They preserved them, which is why their methods still influence modern apiculture. Today, sustainable beekeeping means not over-harvesting, leaving enough honey for winter, protecting colonies from disease, moving hives to follow blooms. And all of this echoes the past because ancient beekeepers already knew. Bees need care, need protection, need space, need balance. And so do we. Legacy that still stings. Today, beekeeping has evolved. Modern suits, movable frames, scientific understanding. But the roots are still there, in ancient clay hives, in smoke-filled rituals, in sacred offerings, in the honeycomb, patterns carved into stone, in the whispers of priestesses named for bees, in the laws protecting apiaries, in the simple act of opening a hive, knowing you're continuing a tradition older than empires, older than cities, older than written language. You open a hive today, and it doesn't feel the same. The hum is quieter. Fewer bees buzz out. Some don't come back. Something's wrong. Not with you, but with them, because bees are in trouble. And if we lose them, we lose more than honey. We lose food. We lose balance. We lose a link in the chain of life that has held strong for thousands of years. So what changed? What happened to the tiny insect that once fed empires? That was worshipped by gods? That built civilizations on its wings? A crisis that's been brewing. Bees have survived ice ages, volcanoes, wars, droughts, floods, even ancient humans who smoked them out just to taste their gold. But now they're struggling. Why? Because modern life is hard on small things. Pesticides, habitat loss, climate change, parasites, pollution, industrial farming, all of it adding up to one big slow collapse. And this time, there's no pharaoh to offer prayers, no Roman estate manager to move hives inland, just us, and a growing silence where there used to be song, the ancient wisdom we've forgotten. Thousands of years ago, beekeepers knew something we've only recently remembered. Bees need care, not control. They thrive not under pressure, but under patience. Ancient Egyptians moved their hives with the seasons, followed the Nile's rhythm, respected the bee's cycle. Greek beekeepers used smoke and not force. Roman farmers kept colonies alive year after year, not because they were sentimental, but because they understood a simple truth. Kill your bees, and you starve tomorrow. Today, we've forgotten that. We overharvest. We crowd colonies into monoculture fields with nothing but almond trees as far as the eye can see. We ship bees across states like cargo, and then wonder why they disappear. Pesticides, the silent killer. One of the biggest threats today? Pesticides. Specifically, a class called neonicotinoids, chemicals that mess with insects' nervous systems. To us, they protect crops. To bees, they poison the world. These chemicals linger in pollen, in nectar, in soil, and when bees return to their hives, they bring death with them. It doesn't always kill them outright. Sometimes it just makes them forget how to find home, or how to feed their young, or how to survive at all. Ancient beekeepers didn't use pesticides. They couldn't. So they worked with nature, watched plants bloom, moved hives, let bees do what they do best. Adapt, survive, thrive. Maybe we should learn from them again. Huge habitat loss when flowers become concrete. Imagine being a bee. Your whole life revolves around flowers. Nectar, pollen, colour, smell. But now, the wild meadows are gone, replaced with parking lots, highways, monoculture farms, where once stood forests rich with wildflowers. Now stands concrete, glass, noise, and silence inside the hive. In ancient Egypt, bees followed the Nile. In Greece and Rome, hives moved with the seasons. Today, bees follow trucks. They're loaded onto trailers and shipped hundreds of miles to pollinate massive orchards. Then, left alone until the next job. No rest, no diversity. Just work, until they collapse. Parasites, disease, the new plague. Bees also face new enemies, like the varroa mite, a tiny parasite that latches onto bees like a vampire, sucks their blood, spreads viruses, destroys colonies. It's everywhere now, and it's devastating. But even this isn't entirely new. Ancient beekeepers knew bees got sick. They knew some hives failed. They knew pests could destroy a season's harvest. But instead of chemical warfare, they focused on prevention. Strong colonies, healthy queens, clean tools, good locations, natural ventilation, simple methods, low impact. They weren't saving every hive, but they were giving bees a fighting chance. And maybe that's enough to start with. Climate change, when seasons lose their rhythm. Bees live by rhythm. Spring brings bloom. Summer brings heat. Autumn brings storage. Winter brings rest. But now, the rhythm is broken. Flowers bloom too early, too late, never at all. Bees wake up confused, fly out expecting lavender, find frost, or fire, or nothing. Ancient beekeepers moved with the land, listened to the sky, knew when to relocate hives, when to protect them from sandstorms or rain. They didn't fight nature. They flowed with it. We tried to tame it. And now, nature fights back. Ancients, what the ancients knew, and we forgot. So what can we learn? From the past? From the clay hives of Egypt? From the smoke rituals of Greece? From the wax-sealed wisdom of Rome? A few things. First, bees need space. Not cages. Not boxes stacked like warehouses, but real, wild, flowering space. Second, diversity matters. Bees don't live off one plant. They need variety, nutrition, balance. Third, don't kill the hive to get the honey. Ancient beekeepers harvested carefully, left enough for survival, didn't strip combs bare, didn't burn nests. They knew honey wasn't free. It was earned. Fourth, treat bees like partners, not machines. Because bees aren't just workers. They're builders, gardeners, keepers of our food supply. Without them, many fruits, nuts, and vegetables vanish. Fifth, listen to the hive. Ancient beekeepers watched bees closely, understood swarms, read signs, knew when to intervene, when to step back. We've replaced intuition with data, and sometimes data misses what the eyes can see. How we can help. Lessons from the hive. So what do we do now? Start small. Plant wildflowers. Avoid pesticides. Support local beekeepers who care. Eat organic. Buy raw honey. Protect green spaces. Restore native habitats. Let dandelions grow. Let gardens breathe. Let bees choose. Let them fly. Let them live. On a bigger scale, we can support regenerative agriculture, move away from industrial monocultures, give bees real ecosystems to thrive in, support research into bee-friendly farming, fund studies on mite-resistant bees, encourage urban beekeeping, and craze. Use rooftops, parks, gardens, bring bees back into cities not just for honey, but for health, for biodiversity, for balance. History isn't just in books. History lives in the air, in the ground, in the buzzing of wings. It's in the way bees still build their hexagonal homes, in the way honey still heals wounds, in the way a single queen still holds an entire colony together. And it's in the warning left behind by people who lived long before us. People who knew bees weren't just useful. They were sacred, powerful, essential. And now, more than ever, we need to remember that. Because bees don't just make honey. They make life possible. And if we keep pushing them toward collapse, we might find ourselves following right behind. How ancient beekeeping tools compare to modern ones. You open a hive today, and it feels like opening a spaceship. Modern suit, gloves, smoker with a metal bellows, frames that slide in and out like drawers. But thousands of years ago, it was different. No gloves, no frames, no instructions, just smoke, clay, and a lot of guts. Because beekeeping didn't start in a workshop. It started in the wild, with hands reaching into hollow logs, with people learning through trial and sting that bees were worth the trouble. And over time, they built tools to help. Tools that, in many ways, still work today. Ancient tools, simple but brilliant. Let's start with the hive. In ancient Egypt, they used horizontal clay tubes, stacked like terracotta drain pipes. Portable, designed to be moved with the seasons. They followed the Nile's flood cycle like modern beekeepers follow bloom seasons. If you lived in Egypt 40 years ago, you didn't open the hive like we do. You tilted it, used a clay pipe to blow smoke into the entrance, calm the bees. Then, carefully, you removed combs by hand, without destroying the colony. That's sustainability. Before we had a word for it. In Greece, beekeepers advanced the design. They used terracotta hives with removable lids, allowed them to peek inside. Harvest without killing the hive. They even developed clay bellows, early versions of the smoker we use today. They filled them with smouldering herbs, thyme, oregano, burned slowly, calm the bees, maybe even flavoured the honey. They sliced combs with bronze or iron knives, melted wax in ceramic basins, filtered it through cloth, the same way we do now, only slower, hotter, more dangerous. In Rome, beekeeping became organised. They used hollow logs, cork bark, and woven baskets sealed with mud or dung. Different designs for different climates. Cold regions, more insulation. Hot ones, better airflow. They smoked bees out with clay pots, used iron knives, recorded techniques in ledgers. They even tracked swarm patterns, too. Seasonal cycles. Pest control. Sound familiar? Because it's not that different from what we do now, just without the plastic. Modern tools, same ideas, better materials. Now fast forward. You're standing in front of a Langstroth hive. Wooden boxes. Frames that slide in and out. Protective suit. Gloves. Modern smoker. It looks high-tech, but the ideas? They're ancient. The smoker? Same concept as the Egyptian clay pipe. Same goal. Calm the bees. Only now we have bellows made of steel, not clay, and we burn wood chips. not herbs. But the effect? Exactly the same. The hive itself still follows the same principles. Stacked sections, movable parts, designed for inspection. The Langstroth hive developed in the 1850 Swas revolutionary. But it was just a more refined version of what the Greeks and Romans had already started. They had removable lids. We have removable frames. From movable frames to they had portable hives. We have migratory beekeeping. Same purpose, just better tools. Harvesting tools, from bronze to stainless steel. Back then, they sliced combs with bronze or iron knives. Now, we use stainless steel, sharper, more durable, less likely to rust. But the action, still the same. Cut the comb, press or strain the honey, melt the wax. Same process, same patience, same risk of getting stung. And the wax? They melted it in ceramic pots. We use electric wax melters. Faster, more efficient. But the idea? Still based on fire, still based on heat, still based on watching beeswax rise to the surface like oil on water. Observation, care, then and now. Ancient beekeepers didn't have microscopes, didn't have gloves, didn't have mite treatments, but they had eyes, and they used them. They watched bees, they tracked swarms, they moved hives to follow the bloom. They understood bees needed space, variety, and care. Today, we have Varroa mite detectors, hive scales, and digital monitoring systems. 10. We track colony weight, brood patterns, pheromone levels. We've turned beekeeping into science. But the basics? Still the same. Observe, protect, respect, hive maintenance, from mud to plastic. Ancient beekeepers sealed hives with mud, dung, or clay. Today, we use insulated foam, plastic covers, and ventilation systems. Same idea. Different materials. They kept hives dry. We keep them dry. They protected against heat. We do too. And just like them, we still fight pests. Mites, wax moths, robber bees. Only now we have traps, chemical treatments, and a growing movement to return to natural solutions, like the ancients did. Sustainable practices, old wisdom, new science. Here's the thing. Modern beekeeping has gotten very technical. We've industrialized honey. We ship bees across states. We force them to pollinate monocultures, and it's killing them. But go back to ancient Egypt. They moved hives with the seasons. Go back to Greece. They let bees choose their own rhythm. Go back to Rome. They kept bees as part of a working farm. No pesticides. No overcrowding. No stress. Just bees. And people who understood that honey was a gift, not a right. What we've forgotten, and are relearning, we've forgotten some things, like the power of naturalventilation.com, like the importance of diverse forage, like the need to leave enough honey for winter. We've replaced intuition with data, but sometimes data misses what the eyes can see, like a weak hive, like a queen that's gone silent, like bees that just don't look right. Ancient beekeepers didn't have apps. They had experience. They had tradition. They had trial and error. And they passed it down. Modern beekeeping, a return to roots. Today, more beekeepers are going back to top bar hives, to natural comb, to chemical-free management, 6 Brive. To local bees, not imported ones. It's not fugu. It's not nostalgia. It's survival. Because bees are in trouble. And the answers? They might be in our past. In the clay hives of Egypt. In the smoke rituals of Greece. In the wax-sealed wisdom of Rome. In the quiet patience of people who knew that honey was never free, that it had to be earned, with care, with smoke, with time. Germa a day in ancient Rome, a first-person journey. You wake up to the sound of yelling, and chickens, and a baby crying somewhere down the hall. Congratulations. You've just woken up in a Roman insula, the ancient version of an apartment building. Think of it as a multi-story death trap held together with dust, prayer, and very questionable architecture. You're on the 3rd or 4th floor, which is bad news, because there's no elevator, no stairs that don't creak like they're about to collapse, just a narrow, winding shaft of stone steps covered in something you don't want to identify. Your mattress, a straw-filled sack. Your pillow, also suspicious. You stretch. Your back screams. Not because you're old, because you slept on what feels like a wooden plank wrapped in regret. And the air? Thick, stale, smells like last night's dinner, or maybe last week's. There's no window, no fan, no breeze, just heat, already. Even though the sun just came up, Rome doesn't wait for your body to adjust. It hits you fast, like a chariot to the gut. Time to get up. You step outside your room, into the hallway, which smells like mildew and burnt oil. Someone left a lamp burning all night again. Great. Now the whole building could go up in flames before breakfast. But hey, at least you won't starve. Probably. You shuffle toward the communal latrina. Yes, there's no bathroom in your apartment. Of course not. You live in a crumbling building where the plumbing consists of hope and gravity. So, off you go. Downstairs. Chamber pot in one hand. Modesty in the other. The latrina. Public toilets. Shared shame. You arrive at the latrina. It looks like a row of stone thrones. Side by side. No dividers. Just men sitting in silence. Sweating. Thinking. Some are staring into the void. Others are grunting. One guy is whistling. In the middle of using the toilet. What kind of world is this? There's a shallow trough beneath the seats. Water flows barely. Enough to carry away the collective shame of Roman society. You sit. You do your business. Try not to make eye contact. Because yes, people will look at you. They'll judge. Maybe even comment. Tight crowd today. No rush. You all right over there? Welcome to Roman hygiene. After you finish, you wash your hands. Wait. No soap. No running water. Just a basin that's seen more fingers than a handshake competition. You dip yours in anyway. Then dry them on your tunic. Because linen is the universal towel. And also the universal napkin. And the universal blanket. And the universal curtain. And the only thing between you and full exposure. Breakfast, if you can call it that. Now for food. If you can call it that. You bought some stale bread yesterday. Still got half a jar of honey. Honey that might be older than you. And possibly cursed. But it's sweet. That counts for something. You tear off a chunk of bread. It tastes like sandpaper soaked in regret. But you chew. You sip watered-down wine, because milk rots too fast, and tea hasn't been invented yet. You eat slowly, trying not to think about the fact that you haven't brushed your teeth since forever. There's no toothpaste, just salt, and occasional mint leaves. You spit out the crumbs, step outside, and brace yourself, because now comes the street. Gobes navigating the streets, chaos, noise, and danger. The city is already alive, not in a poetic way, in a literal, chaotic, terrifying way. Sun high, air thick, noise everywhere, yelling, shouting, haggling, dogs barking, cartwheels rattling, children screaming, and the occasional drunk senator muttering Latin poetry into a fountain. You walk barefoot. Sandals are expensive, and yours fell apart 2 weeks ago. So now it's just you, the dirt, and the occasional stepping on a fig situation. You dodge carts. You duck under hanging laundry. You avoid getting hit by a fishmonger who throws spoiled eels like grenades. And don't forget the smell. Oh man, the smell. Smoke from cooking fires. Incense from temples. The scent of public latrines, wafting on the breeze. Dead animals. Sometimes people just leave them there. If a dog drops in the forum, someone tosses a cloth over it and walks away. Welcome to Rome, where personal space is a myth and safety is a rumour. Work, or what passes for it. You have a job. Sort of. Depending on who you ask. Today, you're hauling bricks. Tomorrow, you might be sweeping streets, or carrying messages, or pretending to care when a senator gives a speech about the glory of Rome while standing in front of a fresco of himself. Work in Rome isn't glamorous. It's survival. You earn just enough to afford another day of life. Maybe, if you don't get trampled by a cart, or stabbed in a fight over olives, you pass by a bakery. The smell is amazing, until you remember how much it costs. You keep walking. Your stomach growls. Your back aches. And somehow, you're still hungry. Lunch, slightly less disappointing than breakfast. Lunch, if you're lucky, maybe some lentils soaked in fermented fish sauce. Yes, fish sauce, known locally as garum, smells like regret, tastes like the sea after a war. You sit near a shaded wall, eat slowly, try not to think about the flies circling your head like vultures. There's no napkin. You wipe your hands on your tunic. Pretend it's clean. By the end of the meal, your stomach is full but uneasy, and your breath smells like garlic, wine, and slight despair. But at least you're fed. Now all you have to do is survive the rest of the day. Midday madness, heat, taxes, and God's watching everything. The sun climbs higher, and so does the temperature. You feel like meat on a spit, roasting slowly, waiting to be devoured. There's no shade, no fans, no ice, just the knowledge that if you collapse here, someone will probably steal your shoes, and if you're lucky, they'll throw a coin into your mouth before tossing you into the Tiber. You pass by a shrine, pause, bow, light a candle, mutter a prayer, because gods are everywhere. Jupiter, Janus, Vesta, Cloacina goddess of sewers. Seriously, you don't skip prayers. Not here, not now, because if you do, everyone nods and says, "Ah yes, He skipped the Saturnalia. He didn't honor the gods. No wonder his roof collapsed. Evening, the day isn't over yet. As the sun dips below the rooftops of Rome, you think, maybe now, finally, you can rest. But no, nightfall in the Roman Empire isn't a time for peace. It's a shift in tone, from noisy chaos to dark, dangerous chaos. First, let's talk about lighting. There isn't any, unless you're rich enough to burn oil lamps all night. Most aren't. So you rely on moonlight, memory, blind hope to find your way home. The vigiles, Rome's night watchmen, they're overworked, underpaid, often bribable, and, most importantly, overwhelmed. Crime thrives at night. Thieves, cut purses, pickpockets. They treat the moonlight like a hunting license. You keep your head low, avoid alleys, don't make eye contact, and definitely don't get caught between two drunken gladiators arguing about someone's missing sandal. That ends in blood. Nightlife, wine, fights, and bad poetry. You pass a tavern. Laughter spills out like smoke. Men shout. Women sing. Drums beat. Inside, cheap wine. Loud music. Bad poetry. Someone's reciting verses about Mars and women he'll never impress. Fights break out. Dice games end in blood. And sometimes, an angry noble decides to settle a grudge by having a slave beat someone in the street. You don't stay long. You know better. But you catch glimpses. A woman dancing with fire. A man juggling knives. A philosopher ranting in the corner. Barefoot. With nothing to lose. You slip past the noise. Head home. Heart pounding. Because Rome doesn't sleep. It just changes form. Back home. Sleep is optional. You return to your insula. It creaks, like it's thinking about collapsing. Rats scurry through the walls. Your neighbour coughs like a dying goat. Somewhere nearby, someone is screaming. Either passion, murder, or both. You press your face into a sweaty pillow. Pray to Mercury for silence. But there is none, because in the Roman Empire, even darkness is loud, and when dawn comes, you'll have to do it all again. Would you last a day? Honestly? No, you wouldn't. Most modern humans with our air conditioning, antibiotics, and toothpaste wouldn't make it past noon. You'd be begging to go back to modern plumbing and antihistamines by mid-afternoon. You'd trade your entire denarii pouch for a hot shower and a chair with a back. And that's okay. You don't need to survive ancient Rome. You just need to understand it. And maybe, just maybe, appreciate that someone somewhere once walked those same filthy streets and helped build the empire so you could sit here today, clean, safe, and mildly horrified, comparing daily life in ancient Rome to other civilizations. You wake up in ancient Rome, not in a palace, not in a villa, but in an insula, a crumbling, overcrowded apartment building made of wood, plaster, and hope. The sun is already hot. The air is thick. Someone's yelling downstairs. Another baby is crying. And the smell? Well, let's just say it's not lavender. This is daily life in Rome. Gritty, chaotic, unforgiving. But how does it compare to other ancient civilizations? Let's take a walk through time, to Egypt, to Mesopotamia, to Greece, and see what life was really like in the ancient world. 2. Ancient Egypt, the weight of the sun. Now imagine waking up not in Rome, but in ancient Egypt. Same straw mat, same linen sheet, same dust. But now, the sun isn't just rising, it's attacking. By breakfast, you're already sweating through your tunic. Because in Egypt, the sun isn't weather, it's divine authority. Ra, the sun god, pilots the sky like he's driving a chariot. And if you're melting, that's a spiritual compliment. You're proving your devotion through endurance. Work starts early. You're hauling bricks, grinding grain, or farming in Nile mud that clings to your skin like a curse. There's no sunscreen, no shade, no mercy. But there is religion. Every act, every meal, every bath, every breath is tied to the gods. You offer food before you eat. You thank Ra before you drink. You pray to Hathor before you sleep. Because in Egypt, life isn't just lived, it's performed for gods who watch your every move. And when you die, you don't just vanish. You face a cosmic exam. Your heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If it's too heavy, a beast with the head of a lion, body of a hippo, and legs of a crocodile waits. Amit. She doesn't judge. She eats. Mesopotamia, the first bureaucracy. Now, let's go even further back. To Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. This is where cities began, where writing was born, where laws were carved into stone, and where daily life was bureaucratic. You wake up in a mud brick home. The walls are thick. The air is still. You're a farmer, a scribe, or a labourer. Maybe all three. You start your day with a simple question. What does the temple need today? Because in Mesopotamia, the gods weren't just worshipped. They were employers. Temples were centres of power. They gave out food. They assigned work. They collected taxes. They ran the economy. Your job depended on the season. In spring, you dug irrigation canals. In summer, you planted. In fall, you harvested. In winter, you prayed, because floods came without warning, and drought could mean death. You didn't have a calendar. You had omens. Priests read the sky. They read sheep livers. They interpreted dreams. And you followed their word, because in Mesopotamia, survival meant obeying the gods and hoping they noticed you. Cain, Greece, the birthplace of philosophy and filth. Now picture yourself in ancient Greece, not in Sparta, not in the Agora, but in Athens, a city of marble temples, philosophy, and questionable hygiene. You wake up in a small house made of stone and clay. No plumbing, no heating, just a small courtyard and a roof that leaks when it rains. You're not a soldier. You're not a philosopher. You're just trying to survive. Your day starts with politics. Yes, even the poor were expected to show up to the assembly, to vote, to argue, to shout, because in Greece, democracy was loud and exhausting. You eat bread, olives, and figs. Wine is watered down. Water is questionable. Sanitation, minimal. You use a clay pot. Empty it yourself. There's no sewer, no public bathhouse unless you're rich. And even then, the baths are full of naked men talking politics. And earwax. But at least there's theatre. At least there's music. At least there's philosophy. Greeks didn't just live. They thought, they debated, they wrote, they sculpted, they dreamed. And even if life was hard, they tried to make it beautiful. Rome, the empire that never slept. Now back to Rome, where the empire never slept. Because someone was always working, or dying, or getting drunk, or getting crucified. Rome wasn't just a city. It was a machine powered by slaves, soldiers, and sand. You wake up to the sound of a donkey braying. Your apartment smells like mildew. You walk barefoot through the hallway. It's sticky. You step outside, and the city hits you like a chariot. Noise, heat, smells, people. Everything is louder. Everything is dirtier. Everything is more. Rome was the first megacity, with over 1 million people, and no zoning laws. You live above a bakery, or a stable, or a brothel. You don't ask. You just try not to fall asleep before the neighbours start screaming. You work. You eat. You survive. You drink. You pray. You argue. You fight. You fall in love. You get robbed. You watch a gladiator bleed for sport. And then you go home, if you have one, because in Rome, class was everything, and nothing was fair. What made them different? So what made these civilizations different? Egypt was spiritual. Every act had a god. Every breath was a prayer. Life was a test for the afterlife. Mesopotamia was structured. Cities were run by temples. Law was carved in stone. Life was a duty. Greece was intellectual. Philosophy shaped politics. Art shaped identity. Life was a debate. Rome was imperial, built on conquest, run by bureaucracy, and fueled by spectacle. Life was survival with an audience. Each civilization had its own rhythm, its own rules, its own suffering. Food. What did they eat? Let's talk about food. Because hunger was a constant, in Egypt, your breakfast was bread so dense it could double as a weapon. Wine watered down. Onions. Dates. Maybe a bit of cheese. No butter. No sugar. No coffee. Just calories. And a lot of sand in your teeth. In Mesopotamia, you ate barley porridge, lentils, onions, beer, a lot of beer, because water was risky and beer was safer. In Greece, you had olives, fish, honey, cheese, wine again watered down, and if you were rich, you got figs. In Rome, you ate bread, more wine, maybe some cheese, garum fermented fish sauce that smells like regret, and if you were lucky, a bit of pork or a boiled egg. But food wasn't just about taste. It was about class, about survival, about what you could afford. And in all of them, honey was gold, literally, because sugar didn't exist yet. And bees were the only way to make anything sweet. Sanitation. Who was the cleanest? Sanitation? Let's not sugarcoat it. None of them were clean, but some tried harder than others. In Egypt, you washed with water and sand. No soap, no showers, but they had public latrines, sometimes even running water in wealthier homes. In Mesopotamia, you had clay pots and a lot of dirt. Some cities had drainage systems, but most people just dealt. In Greece, you bathed in public baths, used oil and a scraper to clean your skin. No soap, no privacy. Just water, sweat, and shared space. In Rome, you had the most advanced system: aqueducts, public fountains, baths with multiple pools, but no soap, no chlorine, and a communal sponge on a stick. Yes, that was a thing. And yes, it was gross. Religion. Who watched you the most? Religion wasn't optional. It was everything. In Egypt, the gods were everywhere. Ra, Anubis, Hathor, Isis. You didn't just worship them. You lived for them. Every action was a ritual. Every death was a journey. In Mesopotamia, gods lived in temples, statues, offerings, prayers, but they were distant, moody, hard to please. You prayed to avoid floods, drought, war. In Greece, gods were more like flawed celebrities. Zeus cheated, Hera raged, Athena debated. Gods had drama, and you had to deal with it. In Rome, gods were politics. Jupiter, Mars, Juno. They weren't just worshipped, they were used to justify conquest, to legitimize power, to unify an empire. And if you didn't honor them, the emperor might take offense, and that was worse than divine wrath. Do justice. Who decided your fate? Justice? It wasn't fair, but it existed. In Egypt, justice was cosmic. Your heart was weighed in the afterlife. In life, Pharaoh ruled with divine authority. Disrespect him, and you might be beaten. Or worse, in Mesopotamia, laws were written. The Code of Hammurabi. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But if you were poor, you still lost. In Greece, justice was debated. Courts, trials, juries, but only free men counted. Women, slaves, not so much. In Rome, justice was public. Gladiators bled for it. Criminals were crucified for it. And if you were lucky, you got a trial. If not, you got a sword. 1. Class structure. Who got to win? Class structure? It was brutal. In Egypt, Pharaoh was God. Then came priests. Then nobles. Then farmers. Then servants. And, at the bottom, slaves. In Mesopotamia, kings ruled. Below them came nobles, priests, merchants, farmers, slaves. In Greece, citizens were free, but not everyone was a citizen. Slaves, women, and foreigners were excluded. In Rome, the hierarchy was tight. Senators, equestrians, plebeians, freedmen, slaves. And if you were poor, you were just trying to survive. No matter where you were, what did they believe about life? Belief shaped everything. In Egypt, life was preparation for the afterlife. You lived to die well. In Mesopotamia, life was short, fragile, and the gods were moody. In Greece, life was about excellence, about balance, about arete, the pursuit of virtue. In Rome, life was about duty, about order, about the empire. You didn't just live for yourself. You lived for Rome, and if you died for it, you got a statue and a funeral. Legacy. Who left the biggest mark? Egypt gave us pyramids, myths, a belief in eternity. Mesopotamia gave us writing, law, city life. Greece gave us philosophy, democracy, art. And Rome? Rome gave us roads, aqueducts, law, language, empire, and a warning that even the mightiest fall, because one day even Rome did. Gaul, Obes, how these civilizations treated women, slaves. You wake up not as a queen, not as a senator, but as someone no one wrote poems about, a woman or a slave. And in the ancient world, that meant everything, because depending on where you were born, you either had rights or you had ropes around your wrists. Let's walk through time, to Egypt, to Mesopotamia, to Greece, to Rome, and see how women and slaves were treated across civilizations that built our world, but often forgot the people who built it. Ancient Egypt, the land where women had power, sometimes. You open your eyes to the Nile's golden light. You're not royalty, but you're not powerless. In ancient Egypt, women could own land, run businesses, divorce, even take men to court. Sounds progressive? It was. Compared to many later societies, Egyptian women had real agency. They could inherit property, manage estates, work as priestesses. Some even became pharaohs like Hatshepsut and Cleopatra. But don't get too excited. Being a woman here didn't mean luxury. It meant labour, grinding grain until your arms burned, carrying water under a sun that baked your skin, raising children in homes without medicine or mosquito nets. Still, you weren't owned. You weren't property. And if you were clever enough, you could rise as a healer, as a merchant, even as a ruler. Egypt gave women something rare in the ancient world: autonomy, but not equality. That would take thousands of years more. Now imagine being a slave in Egypt. Your life isn't yours. You might have been captured in war, bought at a market, born into servitude. Slavery existed, but it wasn't always permanent. Some slaves could buy their freedom. Others could marry into better status. There were even records of slaves inheriting land. Still, most lived hard lives, building temples, hauling stone, serving in noble houses. But compared to other civilizations, slavery in Egypt was slightly less brutal. At least there was a path out, if you survived long enough to find it. Mesopotamia, the first laws, but not for everyone. Now let's go further back, to Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, where writing was born, where laws were carved into stone, including the Code of Hammurabi, It 2:2. And here, women had value, just not control. Marriage was transactional. You were given like property. Your husband ruled the house. Your voice mattered little in public. But behind closed doors, you managed households, made beer, weaved cloth, traded goods. You weren't equal, but you weren't silent. And if you were rich, you could become a high priestess, a respected figure, a woman with influence, even power. But if you were poor, you worked hard, like everyone else. And if you were a slave, things got worse, because slavery in Mesopotamia was rigid. Laws protected masters more than servants. Punishments for disobedience were severe, and escape rare. Still, some slaves could earn freedom, marry into families, own small pieces of their fate, but only if they played by the rules. Rules written by men, etched in stone. Greece, democracy for men, silence for women. Now picture yourself in ancient Greece. Athens, birthplace of democracy. For free men. Everyone else? You were just scenery. Women couldn't vote, couldn't own land unless they were widowed, couldn't speak in public debates. Their job? Stay inside, raise kids, avoid politics, avoid attention. Unless you were a hetaera, a high-class companion trained in philosophy and conversation, then you had access, but still no rights. You were respected, but not free. And if you were poor, you were invisible, washing clothes, weaving cloth, working beside your husband in the fields. You had no say, no standing, only survival. And what about slaves? Oh yes, Greece was built on them, captured in war, sold at markets, used for everything from household chores to mine work. Some educated slaves served as tutors, others laboured in silence. Beaten, chained, owned. There were no laws protecting them, only occasional mercy. And yet, some found ways to live, to save money, to buy freedom, to build lives beyond chains. But for most, life as a slave in Greece meant pain, hard labour, and no future. Rome, a complex web of rights and ropes. Back to Rome, where class was everything, and dignity was optional. Here, women had more freedom than in Greece. They could own property, they could manage money, they could run businesses, but they couldn't hold office, couldn't vote, couldn't lead armies. Still, Roman women from wealthy families wielded influence too, through sons, through husbands, through whispered advice in marble halls. Some, like Agrippina the Younger, came dangerously close to ruling, but most were expected to be seen, not heard, not trusted, not respected. And if you were poor, you worked. Laundry, cooking, selling vegetables in the market, trying not to get harassed by drunk senators. Meanwhile, slavery was everywhere. Most households had at least one. Rich families had dozens. Slaves cleaned floors, taught children, managed estates. Some were beaten, some were branded, some were crucified for rebellion. Others were freedmen, former slaves, allowed to start new lives. Some even became wealthy, owning shops, running businesses, passing down wealth to their children. Freedmen could climb, but only after surviving, because in Rome the line between man and property was thin and easily broken. A tale of two worlds. So what do these civilizations tell us? That women and slaves were rarely free, but sometimes they were respected. In Egypt, women had legal rights. In Greece, they were kept hidden. In Mesopotamia, they were controlled by law. In Rome, they were useful but never powerful. And slaves? They were tools. Property, sometimes people, depended on who held the leash. In all four cultures, power flowed upward, from the bottom, from the backs of workers, from the shoulders of mothers, from the sweat of the enslaved. And yet, despite the oppression, women shaped history. Slaves built cities. They just did it quietly, without credit, without statues, without names. Gomjig, what did it mean to be free? To be free in the ancient world? It wasn't about liberty. It was about status. In Egypt, women could own land, but still died young from childbirth. In Mesopotamia, they brewed beer and wove cloth but followed laws written by men. In Greece, they raised philosophers but were banned from speaking in public. In Rome, they dressed in silk but were still second-class citizens. Freedom wasn't a right. It was a privilege, earned by birth, by gender, by luck. And if you weren't lucky, you prayed harder, worked longer, survived. Mart slavery was everywhere, but not the same everywhere. Slavery was part of daily life, but it looked different in each civilization. In Egypt, some slaves were prisoners of war, others were debtors. Some were skilled artisans, others were used in royal projects. But unlike Rome, slavery wasn't the economy's backbone. In Mesopotamia, slaves were property, bought, sold, punished. But some could earn freedom, especially if they saved enough silver. In Greece, slaves ran households, tutored children, worked in mines. Some were tortured, others were trusted, and a few, very few, managed to escape bondage. In Rome, slavery was an industry. Entire economies revolved around it. Slaves built roads, cleaned villas, taught Latin. Some were beaten. Some were killed for sport in the arena. Others were freed and rose to wealth. Roman slavery wasn't just cruel. It was complex. Because in Rome, a slave could become a citizen. Eventually, if they lived long enough. What we've forgotten. History remembers kings, generals, philosophers, poets, but it forgets the hands that fed them, the voices that raised them, the bodies that built their empires. Women, slaves, they were the quiet force behind every great civilization. They cooked, they cleaned, they fought, they bore children, they bled, they died, and sometimes they changed the world. Like Tamias, the warrior queen who defeated Cyrus the Great, or Boudica, who burned cities to avenge her daughters, or Artemisia, naval commander of Halicarnassus, praised by Xerxes himself. These women broke the mold, defied expectations, rode straight into history, and left scars. Legacy. Who got to be remembered? Who gets remembered? The ones who left records, statues, names. But not all heroes wore crowns. Some wore linen tunics soaked in sweat. Some wore chains. Some wore nothing but defiance. Women and slaves shaped these civilizations. But history barely whispers their names. Still, their legacy survives. In customs, in traditions, in stories passed down, in the way we fight for justice today, because the struggle didn't end with the fall of Rome. It continued through centuries, through revolutions, through protests, through voices. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real story isn't just about kings and wars. It's about the people who made those kings possible, the women who raised them, the slaves who served them, the millions who lived in silence and changed the world anyway.